From 1619 to 1865, Black people were summarily treated as property. From 1865 to 1968, Black people were treated as second-class citizens. Once we started transitioning into the 1970s, all of these experiences could be encapsulated and summarized into one very nasty, painful, hurtful, and disrespectful word: the N-word. Despite all of the strides and the tribulations and the stresses that we went through, there were still people within our society who still embraced using that word as a weapon to let Black people know that they were either property still or they were second-class citizens. So imagine what that's like when you're now having to worry about moving through a society where all of the barriers that were before you are no longer there. But there's still this one word that can be utilized to remind you of your place and to remind you that you are not equal. You have to understand one of the things that a lot of parents do. One of the best things that parents do is they do everything possible to do things in the best interest of their child. And the other thing they try to do is to do everything humanly possible to allow a child to maintain their innocence for as long as possible. If you're an adult, you know there's all kind of travesties and horrors in the world, and you're trying your best to shield your children from them on a regular basis. But unfortunately, there are some realities that you're going to have to face, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. The interesting thing is that I think a lot of times people don't realize, at least from the people I've interacted with, some of my peers, our parents weren't actively coming to us and telling us that at some particular point somebody's going to use the N-word against you. Again, remember, best interest of the child, preserving your innocence as long as possible. But you've got to keep this in mind in terms of the difficulties that Black Generation X had to face. Our parents grew up in a culture where this hostility was the norm. At that particular point in time, for our parents and our grandparents, it was institutionally accepted. From an agency standpoint, it was accepted. It was done in the light of day. It was done in the dark of night. It was done in your face. And it was done behind the scenes. All of this was the normal construct of how they moved. It made it tougher for parents to provide more of a nurturing environment, which is why they went over their head to ensure that they kept their kids in spaces where they could be nurtured and not exposed to that. That meant being around the Elks and the Eastern Stars or the Masons or the Black fraternities or the Links or the 100 Black Women or the Black churches or the Black community groups. They kept them in these spaces where they were constantly being reinforced with positive words, knowing that at some particular point this ugliness was going to reach them. But in the meantime, they were trying to strengthen them up to be able to deal with this because this was the norm. Generation X was entirely different. And that's one thing we don't talk enough about. We literally turned the switch overnight. We literally went from institutions saying it was okay, from the law saying it was okay, from entities saying it was okay, to now this situation where they no longer could do it in your face, but you now saw this happening behind the scenes and behind your back. And part of that was through the use of this word. So imagine if you were a parent and you're now going to a situation where you've moved into this arena where we're now promoting a multicultural society. We're now saying we're turning the corner. We've now gone through all of these various trials and tribulations and marches and loss of these great leaders, but the pushing of these advents of these great laws, you're now having to raise kids in this environment that they no longer have to worry about their kids. Their kids can now ride in the front of the bus. Their kids can sit at the lunch counter. Their kids can go into any establishments. That's what my mom had when she was raising me. But they still knew there were still people out there who would call you the N-word at a moment's notice. But now, since it was no longer culturally acceptable, who were these people and when were they going to manifest themselves? I can tell you, for someone like me, it caught me completely off guard, which I'm pretty sure caught a lot of young people off guard. When I was young, probably about 7 or 8, I was walking with my mom from the grocery store, and these two kids were riding in a car, and they stuck their heads out the window, and they hollered, "Get out the road, you N-words." And I had seen shows, I had watched movies. This was during the time when Roots was out, different shows like The Jeffersons and Sanford and Son and Good Times. And so I had heard the word used. And I'd also seen scenarios where the word was used in a negative context against black people, but I'd never had it in my direction. So when my mom and I were walking and they used it, it threw me because I'm like, wait a minute, I don't understand. Why are they using? What are we doing? Because at a young age, when you're a kid, you equate things to what you're doing. So if something happens to you, you're automatically telling yourself it had to be because of something you did. But what I didn't realize at the time was that this was an awesome, nasty word that was being used against me because of the fact that I existed. What I did was I existed. That's all that mattered. And because I didn't know how to process that, it blew my innocence out because I didn't know what to do with that information. So imagine a generation of black kids who are now moving through this era where, because all of the barriers are gone, the only thing that's left out there are these hidden landmines of when somebody may eventually, or hopefully not eventually, but may find themselves in a position where this word is going to be thrown in their direction. A lot of Black Generation X kids moved in silence, not knowing when it was going to come. Not saying that we moved saying, at some particular point, is somebody going to use that word? Most of us didn't anticipate this word was going to be used at us at all. Now, if we had parents who told us, be mindful this might happen, that's one. Consider yourself lucky. But I ran across friends of mine who literally never heard the word until they got to the South, or never heard the word used to them until they were much older, like even into their teens going into college. So imagine you're in this generation where you're growing up, you're coming K through 12, you're in a multiracial environment with kids, you're just kind of hanging out and so forth, and you don't know if this is ever going to happen to you. So if nobody prepares you for it, you don't anticipate it. But then if it does happen to you, you're now having to process, what does that mean when it's being thrown at you, when you're not doing anything other than existing, and recognizing that you existing is what's the problem, but not appreciating why is that a problem if we're moving in this new environment where it shouldn't be a problem. But now you're telling us it is a problem. So again, this is the landscape we had to move through. The reason why this is crucial is because I know that every marginalized group has that one word. There's that one word or phrase that shakes them to the core. I can't speak to any other generations to know what those words are. I have a few ideas in terms of different demographics and so forth, but I would never disrespect them to speak their experience. I can tell you that for Black people, that was the word. There were other words that were used, you heard, so forth, that were equally as harmful, but that was the one that stopped you in your tracks. The difficult thing the Generation X had, Black Generation X had, is that we moved in a space where we didn't know when this was going to happen. Our parents, they grew up knowing and learning that silence was for survival. You knew you were moving in spaces where this was going to happen. It was going to come at you at some particular point. And whether it was at a young age or much later, if you moved in spaces, especially if you were in the Jim Crow South, it was a great possibility that you were going to get this experience, and you were going to get it soon and probably, unfortunately, often. It was more about shock, because we were growing up in a period of time where there was this presumptive thought that we were now in this multicultural society, so we shouldn't have to experience this. But guess what? We did. And as a result, we had to figure out, how do we deal with that? How do we process that in a situation when this is coming at us and no one has prepared us? Not saying our parents didn't always prepare us, but no one could prepare us for the scenario. Let me be clear. It's not that nobody could prepare us or nobody prepared us for hearing the word. It's not that we didn't see it and know that it couldn't happen. Nobody prepared us for the scenario for when this word would present itself. If you were growing up in the Jim Crow or the segregation era, any place you went was an opportunity for this to happen. So you kind of knew that. But for us, who was told that now, sitting in the front of the bus, sitting at the lunch counter, going to schools and places of our choosing, we had no way of knowing when this was going to happen. So imagine what it means when you have some people, some of my brothers and sisters of Generation X, who may have gone through this life and never had that. I applaud you. But there was a lot of us who did, and never knowing when this was actually going to present itself. So how do you prepare for the shock when you're not sure when the situation would present itself? It's important for you to know that word did not define us, but it did define the world around us. What it did was it reinforced to us that there were still people who struggled and resisted against the change that they were now living in. And as a part of that resistance, that was one of their weaponized ways to let us know, whether they wanted to or not, to let us know that there were still aspects of this country that wanted us to go back to the ways and to the time when we were considered property and when we were considered second-class citizens. For Black Generation X, we had to learn a greater resilience because now, not only are we moving in spaces where we're dealing with our classmates, our friends, and people around us who didn't look like us, who welcomed us and embraced us, we had to also be mindful of the fact that there were people around us who still wanted us to cause us harm, and using that N-word was one of the ways they did it.